Can you, hopefully you can all hear me now. So good afternoon, and what we're going to talk about this afternoon is what you need to know before you import or export, because we want to have a successful and legally acceptable supply chain. And successful means the goods move as slickly as possible through the supply chain with the least amount of difficulty. Now, with our experience tells us that in many cases, the reason that there are delays, extra costs and problems in a supply chain start at the very beginning before an export takes place. So it doesn't matter which end of the supply chain you are, if the export part is not adequate, then it will cause delays both at export and import and all along the supply chain, which is what we really want to avoid. So it really is for the exporter to start this off well, not adequately, but well. And then they will cover what's needed to smooth the path of the goods through the supply chain. Now that starts, and it may seem very silly to say this, but it starts with a sensible description of the goods. I was once asked to ship something called custard ties. And you can imagine that upset the foodstuffs people. People wondered what a tie was. Was it something to tie things together? What exactly was this? Well, it had nothing to do with foodstuffs or tying things together. It was a gentleman's tie, a necktie in yellow. So if you start out with something which is not a sensible description, might be a marketing description, but not a sensible description of your product, then you are going to cause a problem all the way through the supply chain, while somebody asks you what's custard and the other person asks you what sort of tie. And we don't want those delays. Now that can be applied to any industrial product, to a chemical, to anything else. If you don't give a sensible, recognizable description that avoids misunderstandings, you are setting up for failure. We then move on to the exporter having a very good knowledge of what the ingredients or the composition of their item is. Without that, you can't begin to understand what you need to do. So we need to have a proper ingredient list from the exporter or a composition list. Is that item you wish to ship made of plastic? If so, what kind of plastic? There are lots of different kinds of plastics and different rules for each. So we have to understand our composition very well. Now that doesn't mean you've got to display your secret confidential recipe or way of constructing something to the whole world. You haven't. But what you do have to do is pick out of it the things that are going to cause a difficulty in the supply chain, and then you need to smooth the path of those things. That would lead us to an understanding, once we had the ingredients and components, as to whether we have anything that is considered dangerous or hazardous, or what they call odoriferous, means it smells and will make other things smell, things that could contaminate other things, or things that shouldn't be put with other things because they cause some sort of noxious gas when put together. Now people think, oh, well, my product isn't one of those, but does your product have a battery? Is there a battery in there somewhere? If so, you need to mention it. It's a potential hazardous item. Does your product, is it machinery with residual oil in it? If so, that oil is flammable and is an issue in shipment. It has to be known about. None of those things means you can't ship. It just means you have to be careful and use the appropriate documentation. That then brings us to, are your goods prohibited or licensed? Now that could be prohibited for export altogether or need an export license, but it could equally be in your destination country of choice that they need a license to get in, or they're prohibited from entering that country. There's not much point in exporting something if it's going to stick the other end, because it simply isn't allowed in, and you will either get the destruction costs or have to pay for it to come home again. So we have to consider those prohibited and licensed ideas before we start. And we can't do that without the first things that I've mentioned. Now that might lead to needing test certificates, and they could be for chemical analysis, they could be for functionality, for electrical safety, for many different things. I once had to ship a rocking horse, a very large, proper sized rocking horse. And that had to go and be tested as a toy to see if it could be rocked safely by a child to a certain degree before it would topple over and hurt the child. So all products have some sort of certification, really, as to their functionality. And you may have to present those certificates at the other end, at the importing end. So again, if you haven't figured that out before you start, all you're doing is delay, because the goods will get stuck at the other end. Now that leads us to adequate packaging. I say adequate because you can go over the top with this, because if you do the best packaging ever, the sort of art museum style packaging, then that is bulky, heavy, and therefore very expensive to move. So what you need is the packaging that is right for your goods, not over the top, in order to keep the cost down. Size and weight matter, but protecting the goods matters too. But the other issue is, are you allowed to use that packaging at the other end? Can you import the goods on that particular sort of pallet? Now we have that with Brexit with the EU, because only certain sorts of wooden pallet, which have been certified, having been fumigated and tested, are allowed to be used. So you may have that in the country of import for your goods. What kind of packaging? Can you use straw? Can you use cardboard? Must it be recyclable packaging? And must you have arranged to recycle it? That is a question you need to answer before you set out. And that brings us also to a thought about goods in sets or kits. How have you listed those goods? Is it one set comprising, or a particular kit comprising certain items? Or have you gone for just a kit, which tells nobody anything, and therefore will stop your shipment moving for export, import, and everything in between? You've got to be careful what you actually put down. Is your item so tiny it could easily be lost, or so huge you need special lifting gear? You have to give consideration to these things too. If your item is too tall to go in the aircraft door, then you're only going to get trouble if they then turn it on its side and whatever is inside smashes. So you need to give consideration to that too. Then we come to what some people call the technical customs work, which is the tariff code, sometimes known as an HS code, a commodity code, something like that. You, the exporter, are expected to know this code. It is a number which describes your goods, a number assigned by customs in the exporting country. And sadly, we should not expect the number to be exactly the same in the importing country. It is most likely to be different in some digits. But without that number, your goods are not going to move, or you are going to be asking, as the exporter, whoever you've chosen to carry the goods, a fast parcels operator like DHL or UPS, or a freight agent who's doing air freight or sea freight for you, to frankly guess based on your description. Now that is a problem for you, because you, the exporter, are legally liable to get that right, and you can be fined for getting it wrong. An importer who uses the wrong tariff code is going to pay the wrong amount of duty and tax, and therefore be legally liable to their importing customs authority for penalties for those errors too. So knowing your code is essential. Now some people say, well, I don't know anything about that. Where am I going to get the code? Well, if you go to bake a cake, it's no good throwing your hands in the air and saying, I don't know what the ingredients are. You have to find out, and then find out how to combine them. Well, the same is true of export and import. If you're not sure where to get your tariff code, we have a seminar for that, but you do need to find out and know in advance. Then we have the economic origin. Now you'll note I was careful to say economic origin, not geographical origin. They are two completely different things. You can make a product out of things you gather from your garden and produce a lovely cosmetic of some sort, and you may find it's still not British. So economic origin is a whole different set of rules, and you are supposed to know as the exporter what that is, and you're supposed to tell the importer how you arrived at that determination. Then we come to customs value, because the value that you sell it at may not be the right one to put on the customs declaration, either for export or import. And that will lead us to a description of the value using an Incoterm, the current set of Incoterms 2020. Now, the Incoterm tells you what's included in the price. Does it include delivery? Does it include destination taxes? That sort of thing. You should know this, and you should make sure it is clear on all of your paperwork and in all of your communications, both to the carrier and to the importer, whoever they are. So you need to pass all this information clearly and in detail to your carrier, so DHL or FedEx, or to a freight agent. They need to know all of this at your initial communication. And they need it legally in writing. Now that can be an email, but still they need it in writing, not just a phone call. And it is not for your freight agent or carrier to make guesses on this stuff based on some scant little bit of information that you might give them. So you should always forward this to the importer, all of this information, so that they can come back to you and say, but I know you can't do that, or if you call it that, you won't be allowed in. So you need that communication in advance. If you do that, you've smoothed the supply chain as much as it's in your power to do. And therefore, your goods should move with far, far fewer questions, which is the aim, after all. We'd like it all to go through without ever hearing a word about it. So that's my general aim when I do a shipment anyway. Wave goodbye and never hear of it again is my idea. So at that point, I think we can throw open to some questions if there are any.
Nobody has yet indicated that they'd like to ask a question. Do you have any questions, anybody? I'll unmute you all for the moment, so please say if you have a question. Are there any questions from anybody?
No, nothing from me.
No, I'm good, thank you.
No, thanks.
Oh, thank you.
No questions?
In that case, I shall say a little more about the difficulties.
And
If anyone has a question, let us know.
I will just mute everybody for again. But again, you can use the chat box to indicate if you'd like to ask a question. Or if necessary, if you can't use the chat, put your camera on and raise your hand and wave at me.
Hopefully you can still hear me. That's good.
Hello, hi. I have a question.
Very well.
Hi, Marius.
I don't know if you can hear me. Hello. Oh, hi. I had few issues with regards to kind of closing. I mean, chasing destinations to close the custom documents, and I wanted to know what documents are kind of you can use to close the custom documents. I mean, if the proof of delivery POD is not available or CMR, what are the other options to close it? Basically, I was talking to a couple of custom agents and I got contradicted messages.
Well, it depends which customs procedure you are using. If you are using transit, that's a customs procedure, not just transiting a country, then the driver on arrival in the destination country has to attend a particular customs post. And they have to go there and have their paperwork signed off, and it's then entered into the transit system, a computer system, which is currently Europe-wide, but we will remain part of the transit process after Brexit. And that, once it's put into the transit system that they've reached their destination country, then that is closed. But if the driver does not go to the proper customs office of destination before unloading at the customer, then the transit will not be closed and the goods will never arrive. I mean, they may very well physically arrive, but they never arrive according to customs. And that means that the export agent, he remains liable for the goods, having never been imported. And that causes a great deal of difficulty and grief, shall we say, a lot of chasing and pain. So that's if you're using the transit system.
Transit system. And the destination, I mean, the receiver that, that they kind of, signed for the delivery and approved the delivery, they're not liable for anything. is still the exporter.
Understand.
Basically, should the receiver make some checks that, yeah, the transport went via customs office, and is basically, is there any liability on the receiver as well?
Under transit, it is the dispatcher who remains liable.
Dispatcher.
And if the goods have not gone to a customs office of destination. The only other way of dealing with that is if your actual importer, where the goods are physically going to go, is an authorized consignee, because that means they are an office of destination in their own right, and they can sign the paperwork and enter the details to the transit system. But that means they have to be an official authorized consignee in order to do
Okay.
that. With a
Okay.
shipment
So yeah.
under transit, then a POD, a signed delivery note, there must be something. It's very...
Yeah. So what I was advised to use by one agent, but the other one said he's not sure if that would work. Basically, yeah, because we explored these options, and I think these documents were existing, but they just been lost by people. I don't know. But basically, I have like a loading packing list from the warehouse, and I was asked to kind of ask the receiver to sign it and stamp it, and that apparently could serve as a proof of delivery as well, even retrospectively. So yeah, for now I'm exploring this option because yeah, it is for transit.
Is it under transit that you're talking about?
Yes, under the transit. Yeah.
Well, under transit, it's the office of departure that has to do the signing and the placing onto the transit system. It's not really the piece of paper that matters. It's putting the code into the transit system that matters, and that's going to be the office of destination, which is a customs manned place that they have to go to first, or an authorized consignee.
Okay.
It's not something that's meant to be done retrospectively.
I see.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions. Does anybody else have a question? No, we have no other questions at the moment. Susan, if you'd like to continue with a little more detail.
I will. So we talked about smoothing the path. And I said that you need to speak with the importer and be very clear about your products and give them all the information that is needed for them to begin to import. And that will depend on the Incoterm, because the other question that Mario's raised there is it always the exporter's problem? Well, under transit, I'm afraid it is, to get the transit system signed off. But if you're using other customs regimes to other places, then under Incoterms, it might be the importer's problem. But if you can never prove that your goods got to the destination, that wherever that destination is, wherever along the supply chain that is, because according to Incoterms, the destination could be leaving your factory just outside your door. It doesn't have to be in the foreign country. But wherever that destination is, according to the contract, if you can't prove it got there, then things are not going to go well. So you are looking for a proof of delivery, and that can take many forms, but it's usually a signature and a date on some piece of paper that describes the goods properly, which can be the packing list, it can be an invoice, any other sort of document with a proper description of the goods, so that we know the quantity that was allegedly received. Because we all know, of course, if you sign for 10 boxes, it doesn't mean there are 10 items in there, one could be empty. Or as is sometimes the case, the middle one on the pallet's a brick, which is very unfortunate if you have a theft en route. But again, how do you prove where that theft en route took place? Only by having the proper documentation that says what was in there in the first place, and having it signed for all along the route by different agents and air carriers or sea carriers as they hand off to one another along the supply chain. It has to be able to say, and you have to be able to gather the handoff with the right description on the paperwork to allow you to say what was supposed to be there and what they are actually signing for. So it's very important that we get that from the export end properly along the supply chain. And many of our clients have come unstuck because what they give to the freight agent in the country of export is, frankly, very poor. It's inadequate. They think it's all right because they know what that item is. So they don't look at the paperwork and see custard tie and question what it means. They know what it is. They packed it. They've seen the fabric. But it's no good having that big debate when your item hits American customs, because you've already hit a delay. You might also have been stopped on the way out of the UK for where's your sanitary certificates and your health certificates for the custard. You know, this is not going to be very helpful. And it could also be with the ties that you're asked just on the word ties, if that's all it said, whether this is an item that needs an export license, because it could be used as an item of restraint for human beings or an item of torture. It wouldn't be the first time that had occurred. And if you think about the 1 or 2 people who have been publicly prosecuted in the UK for shipping things they shouldn't to countries they shouldn't, it always started out as something very simple as this is a plastic pipe, or this is an iron or steel pipe. And they turned out to be the barrels of some giant guns. They were pipes, but they weren't really just pipes. So we need to have this export end really, really clear and not scrimped upon in any way, in order that we can get the goods smoothed through without these hideous questions that take such a long time to answer. And I mean, one of the fundamentals, Marius, is if your actual receiver didn't bother to sign the piece of paper and keep it safe, then of course you've got a problem. But then did the people you were working with, both in your offices and in the destination offices, and indeed in the freight agents or couriers that you were using, understand that shipping paperwork is very important? It's not to be treated casually, lost, thrown away, misfiled. It is actually confidential, and it is very serious to not have the paperwork if customs come and do an audit. If you can't defend yourself when customs audit, then they're going to think the worst. And they may or may not be right, but you can't prove it either way, which is not what you want. So you see, it begins at the very, very beginning of this. Have you got the export right? Have you got all of the paperwork right? In which case you can expect it to move smoothly, or actually have you set yourself up for failure? And the vast majority of small exporters, and indeed even some of the bigger ones, set themselves up for very obvious failure by the paperwork that they produce. And that might be handwritten, in which case you've got no excuse because you can control what you write. Or it may be computer driven by some mega global system, which has had data input that you had no input to. And it was input by someone who had no idea of its usage and why it would be important to you to have some extra words in. Now, my custard ties problem could easily have been improved by saying custard coloured ties of silk, 100% silk. Now, if I'd written that description down, or put gentlemen's ties of silk, yellow, coloured, anything like that, I would not have had the difficulties. And I spent a lot of my time in retail crossing out the description I was given and putting something more sensible in. Now, that's easy if you've only a small system. It's harder if it's a bigger system, but it doesn't mean you don't need to do it. You absolutely do. And it could lead to you needing additional pieces of paper, such as certificates of origin or the test certificates I spoke about, which mean that if you haven't got those in advance, of course, once the goods are moving, you haven't got the goods to be tested. So then you've got to try and get them back, get them tested and send them out again, which is all expense and mega delay. So I think you can hopefully see now that what you do at export, even before you pass any information on to anybody, really, really matters. Give that importer the instruction that you want the POD signed and emailed back to you same day. Make them realize how important it is to you. Then perhaps they might actually do it. But if you haven't asked them to, maybe it's a bit your fault that they didn't. We can't always assume everyone has common sense or everyone has understanding of the supply chain or what matters to us. We tend to assume, and that gets us into trouble, which is most unfortunate. So I think I'll stop there while we have a couple of minutes left, just for any other questions.